Imagine a book so vital the early apostles quoted it as scripture, yet so dangerous the later church tried to erase it from history. This isn't just a story about fallen angels. It's a report on a celestial mutation, a genetic error that bled into our world to create the Nephilim. We often call them monsters, but what if they were actually the ghosts of a failed rebellion in the heavens? Today we're reopening the most controversial file in biblical history, the Book of Enoch. Why was the truth about our origin hidden for nearly 2,000 years? To understand why the Book of Enoch was so explosive, we have to start with the source material, the Bible itself, specifically the book of Genesis. In the sixth chapter, just before the world is swallowed by the great flood, we find a passage that has haunted scholars for centuries. It's brief, almost like a footnote, but its implications are massive. It speaks of a time when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. From these unions the Nephilim were born, the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. But who exactly were these sons of God? Depending on who you ask, they were either righteous descendants of a human bloodline or something far more disturbing, divine beings who crossed a forbidden boundary. This idea of a supernatural race walking the earth isn't unique to the Levant. If we travel west to the marble temples of ancient Greece, we find a striking parallel. The Greeks told stories of the gigantes, towering entities born from the blood of the heavens. Like the Nephilim, they were depicted as a bridge between the divine and the mortal. Think of the demigods of Greek lore: Heracles, Perseus, Achilles. They were the offspring of gods and humans, possessing strength that defied nature. In the Greek mind, the world was once a place of mighty men of old, much like the language used in Genesis. But there was a darker side to this power. In the myths, these giants eventually rose up against the gods of Olympus in a war of cosmic proportions. It was a clash of bloodlines that threatened to tear the universe apart. Could the Nephilim of the Bible be the Hebrew memory of this same primordial conflict? But the story goes even further. Across the frozen seas of the north, the Vikings spoke of the Jotun. These weren't just big men, they were primordial forces of chaos. The most famous was Ymir, the first of the frost giants. According to Norse mythology, the gods eventually had to kill Ymir to use his body to shape the forests, mountains, and fjords of the earth. Notice the pattern. Whether it's the Greek gigantes, the Norse Jotun, or the biblical Nephilim, there is a consistent theme: a race of elder beings, larger and more powerful than us, who existed at the dawn of time and had to be cleared away for humanity to survive. It's as if the ancient world was collectively mourning a lost history, a time when the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin, and the consequences were terrifying. But let's go back to that phrase, the sons of God. In the original Hebrew text, it's B'nai Elohim. Throughout the Old Testament, this term is almost always used to describe angels or members of the heavenly host. If we take that literally, we aren't just talking about a different culture. We're talking about a breach in the cosmic order. Imagine the scale of this. If these were indeed angels, then the Nephilim weren't just strong warriors. They were a biological anomaly, a corruption of the human image. And this leads us to a glaring problem in the Genesis account. The text mentions them, describes their birth, and then it moves on. It's one of the greatest plot holes in history. Genesis gives us the what, but it leaves us with 1,000 questions. Why did the angels do it? What did they teach us? And why was God's response so final? This is where the book of Genesis stops and the book of Enoch begins. Think of Genesis as a summary, a heavily edited report of a catastrophe. It provides the outline, but it hides the how and the vivid details. For the writers of Enoch, this silence was unacceptable. They saw the sons of God not as a mystery to be ignored, but as a criminal record to be exposed. They believed that the history of humanity was inseparable from the history of these fallen watchers. They argued that the giants didn't just exist. They ruled, they destroyed, and they brought the world to the brink of extinction. By looking at the book of Enoch, we aren't just reading a banned text. We are stepping into a courtroom where the giants of our forgotten past are finally being named. But there's more to it than just size and strength. To truly understand the Nephilim, we have to look at their father, the mysterious Enoch himself. And to do that, we have to look at the numbers. In the heart of the genealogy of Genesis, Among names that stretch across centuries like ancient oaks, there is one figure who sticks out like a glitch in a carefully coded system. His name is Enoch. To understand why Enoch is so strange, we have to look at the people who came before and after him. His grandfather, Jared, lived to the staggering age of 962. His son, Methuselah, famous for being the oldest man in the Bible, reached 969. In those days, reaching a millennium was almost the norm. But then we arrive at Enoch. The text tells us he lived for exactly 365 years. By the standards of his family, Enoch died as a young man, a mere child compared to his father. But the Bible doesn't say he died. Instead, it uses a hauntingly beautiful and enigmatic phrase. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Think about that for a moment. In a book defined by its begats and its deaths, Enoch is the first character to bypass the grave entirely. He simply vanished. This missing piece of the puzzle has fascinated theologians and mystics for 2,000 years. If Genesis is a summary, it left us with a massive cliffhanger. What happened during those 365 years, and why that specific number? Have you ever stopped to consider that number? 365, it is perhaps the most significant number in our daily lives. It is the number of days it takes for our planet to complete one full journey around the sun. In a world of giants and supernatural lifespans, 365 isn't just a random age, it's a celestial code. By living exactly 365 years before being taken from the earth, Enoch's very life becomes a living calendar. It suggests that his story isn't just about morality, but about the mechanics of the universe itself. And this is exactly where the Book of Enoch fills in the blanks. In the section known as the Book of Luminaries, we discover that Enoch wasn't just a holy man, he was an initiate. He describes being taken into the heavens and guided by the archangel Uriel. But he wasn't there to see harps and clouds. He was there to study the laws of the stars. Uriel shows Enoch the massive gates in the sky where the sun rises and sets. He explains why the days grow longer in the summer and shorter in the winter. He charts the phases of the moon and the movements of the planets. To a modern ear, it sounds like an ancient astronomy manual, revealed through a divine lens. It is here that science and religion become one. Enoch describes a solar calendar of 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each. It is strikingly precise. It suggests that the writers of this text were obsessed with order. The idea that the cosmos wasn't just a chaotic void, but a clockwork masterpiece designed by a great architect. But there is a deeper mystery buried in these numbers. Some scholars have proposed a fascinating theory regarding the massive lifespans of Enoch's relatives. If you take the 969 years of Methuselah and consider that years might actually have been lunar cycles or months, his age drops to around 78, a perfectly normal age for a respected elder in the ancient world. Yet for Enoch, the number 365 remains constant. He is the bridge between our world of 365 days and the eternal world of the divine. He represents a human being who mastered the laws of time and in doing so stepped out of it entirely. He didn't just walk with God, he learned the very language God used to write the stars. However, Enoch wasn't the only one receiving secrets from the heavens. While he was learning the orderly movements of the sun and moon from Uriel, the rest of humanity was about to be introduced to a much darker curriculum. But there's more to it. You see, while Enoch was being elevated to the status of a cosmic scribe, another group of divine beings was looking down at the earth with a very different intention. They weren't interested in teaching humanity the order of the stars. They were interested in teaching us how to break the world. This leads us to the most terrifying chapter in the Enochian lore, a moment in history where the boundary between heaven and earth wasn't just crossed, it was shattered. To understand why God decided to flood the world, we have to look at what happened on the summit of Mount Hermon. Let's continue our journey into the dark heart of the rebellion. While Enoch was being ushered into the celestial courts to learn the divine order of the universe, a dark shadow was gathering over a remote peak in the ancient world. This was Mount Hermon. To the people of the Levant, the name itself carried a heavy weight. Hermon literally translates to the ban or the curse. According to the Book of Enoch, this summit served as the bridgehead for a cosmic invasion. A group of angels known as the Watchers, or the Grigori, looked down from their stations and saw the daughters of man. They didn't just see them, they desired them. But their descent wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. It was a calculated military-style operation. Their leader, Semyasa, understood the gravity of what they were about to do. He feared that he alone would bear the weight of a massive sin, and so he forced his companions to bind themselves to the act. On the cold heights of Mount Hermon, 200 angels swore a mutual oath, tethering their fates together in a pact that would forever alter the human story. But there is more to this rebellion than just the birth of the giants. In the Enochian tradition, the sin of the Watchers was a dual transgression. Yes, there was the physical union, but there was also the leak of heavenly secrets, a forbidden transfer of technology that humanity was never meant to possess. Think of it as a divine tech support gone horribly wrong. Each of the lead Watchers became a dark patron of a specific craft. Azazel, perhaps the most infamous of the group, taught men the art of metallurgy. He showed them how to mine the earth's hidden veins to forge swords, knives, and shields. Under his guidance, the tools of survival were hammered into weapons of war. But Azazel's curriculum wasn't limited to the battlefield. He also taught the art of vanity, how to use antimony to paint the eyes, and how to craft bracelets and jewelry from precious stones. In Azazel's eyes, the violence of the sword and the seduction of the ornament were two sides of the same coin, tools for the ego to dominate others. Other Watchers followed suit. Semyaza taught the secrets of enchantments and the cutting of roots for sorcery. Armaros revealed the counter spells. Barakiel taught astrology, while others explained the constellations, the signs of the sun, and the path of the moon. This wasn't enlightenment in the positive sense. It was the premature delivery of power into the hands of a species that lacked the moral maturity to handle it. The Watchers didn't just give us tools. They gave us the means to destroy ourselves. But as the forbidden knowledge spread through human society, a new and far more physical terror was beginning to grow. The women had conceived, and the offspring they bore were not human. They were the Nephilim. If we look at this through the lens of biology and ecology, the rise of the Nephilim represents a catastrophic failure of the natural order. Let's call it Nephilim biologic. In any ecosystem, there is a delicate balance between the size of a predator and the resources available to sustain it. A creature that stands hundreds of feet tall, some texts suggest they reach the size of mountains, is not just a monster, it is a walking death sentence for the planet. Imagine the caloric intake required to sustain a single Nephilim. According to the text, these giants began by consuming the labor of men, the grains, the livestock, the very food meant to keep human families alive. But it wasn't enough. When the fields were stripped bare and the barns were empty, the giants didn't simply starve. They turned their insatiable hunger toward the humans themselves. The world quickly descended into a nightmare of predation. The Nephilim began to sin against the birds, the beasts, and the fish, devouring everything in their path. And eventually they turned on each other, tearing apart their own kind to satisfy a hunger that was literally bottomless. This wasn't just a war of the giants. It was a total collapse of the biosphere. The earth was being eaten alive by a race that was never supposed to exist. The cries of the dying reached a fever pitch. The soil was soaked in blood, and the air was thick with the scent of corruption. It was a world out of balance, a zoo tycoon experiment gone horribly wrong, where the stars had fallen and the beasts were being consumed. Down in the valleys, the remaining humans cowered in fear, armed with the weapons Azazel had taught them to forge, but finding them useless against the mountain-sized terrors they had helped create. The earth itself finally cried out against the lawlessness, and this time, someone in the higher heavens was listening. Up in the celestial heights, the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel looked down and saw the carnage. They saw the blood, the forbidden weapons, and the giants devouring the world. They took the case to the Creator, asking why he had allowed this to happen. The response they received would be the most devastating sentence ever passed on the physical world. But before the floodgates could be opened, there was one more task for the man who walked with God. Enoch was about to be sent on a diplomatic mission unlike any other in history, not to the humans, but to the fallen angels themselves. Let's continue our journey into the moment when a mortal man became the judge of the heavens. For centuries, the Book of Enoch was little more than a ghost, a rumor whispered in the corners of libraries and mentioned in the margins of ancient letters. It was a text that had been effectively erased from the Western world, deemed too strange or too dangerous for the official biblical canon. But how does a book this massive, this influential, simply vanish? And more importantly, how did it find its way back to us? The story of its rediscovery begins in a place you might not expect, a damp, cold cell in the Tower of London. In the year 1607, the famous English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh sat imprisoned, awaiting trial for a plot against the king. To pass the agonizing hours of his captivity, Raleigh did what many men of his stature did. He began to write. He embarked on a monumental task, a complete history of the world. But as Raleigh reached the earliest chapters of human history, he stumbled upon a mystery. He had heard a persistent rumor, a story that had survived since the time of the early church fathers. It was said that there existed a lost text written by the hand of the biblical Enoch himself. Raleigh wrote about this missing book with a sense of genuine longing, noting that it was rumored to contain the course of the stars, their names and motions. According to Raleigh's sources, this sacred knowledge wasn't destroyed. It was being kept safely in the land of Sheba, a region we now know as Ethiopia. At the time, Raleigh's reference was seen as little more than a cryptic legend. Ethiopia was a land of myth to the Europeans of the 17th century, a place of ancient kingdoms and hidden treasures. But the rumor was true. While the rest of the Christian world was busy debating which books belonged in the Bible and which should be burned, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had quietly remained one of the oldest and most isolated Christian communities on earth. To them, Enoch was never banned. He was a hero, a prophet, and his book was a cornerstone of their faith. For over 1,000 years, they had preserved the text in their own liturgical language, Ge'ez, far from the reach of Roman or Byzantine censors. It wasn't until 1773 that the ghost finally returned to the West. A Scottish explorer named James Bruce, who had spent years searching for the source of the Blue Nile, managed to smuggle 3 copies of the Book of Enoch out of Ethiopia. When those manuscripts arrived in Europe, they sent a shock wave through the academic world. Scholars were finally looking at the very words Raleigh had dreamed of in his prison cell. But there was a problem. Skeptics immediately began to question the book's authenticity. They argued that it was likely a medieval forgery, written long after the Bible had been compiled, perhaps by someone trying to capitalize on the legend of Enoch. For nearly 2 centuries, the Book of Enoch sat in a sort of academic limbo, fascinating but untrusted. That changed in 1947 with what is arguably the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the sun-scorched caves above the ruins of Qumran, a young Bedouin shepherd stumbled upon a cache of ancient jars. Inside were hundreds of manuscripts that had been preserved by the desert's dry heat for 2,000 years. Among the biblical texts and community rules, archaeologists found something that changed everything. Fragments of at least 10 different copies of the Book of Enoch, written in Aramaic. This was the smoking gun. These fragments proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the Book of Enoch was not a medieval invention. It was ancient. It was being read, studied, and copied by Jewish communities centuries before the birth of Jesus. In fact, it was so popular in the ancient world that it had more copies in the Qumran library than many of the books that eventually made it into the modern Bible. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls acted as a bridge across time. It confirmed that when the early apostles quoted Enoch, they weren't quoting a fringe legend. They were quoting a text that was widely regarded as authoritative and divinely inspired. But this brings us to an even deeper question. If the Book of Enoch was so ancient and so beloved by the early believers, why did it have to be hidden in the first place? Why did the Western Church try so hard to make us forget it? The answer lies in the content itself. You see, Enoch doesn't just tell a story of the past, it presents a vision of the heavens that was far too radical for the political structures of the later Roman Empire. It describes a universe where a simple mortal man doesn't just bow before the divine, he is invited into the inner sanctum to witness the judgment of the heavens. Let's continue our journey into the most daring scene in all of ancient literature, the moment when Enoch, a scribe made of flesh and bone, stood before a throne of fire to deliver a message to the fallen gods themselves. The transition from the blood-soaked valleys of earth to the crystalline heights of heaven is, perhaps, the most jarring moment in the entire book of Enoch. Imagine Enoch, a man of flesh and bone, suddenly whisked away from the chaos of the giants and into a realm that defies human logic. He describes being carried by clouds and guided by the winds into a palace built of hailstones, with walls like flickering tongues of fire. As he moves deeper into this celestial architecture, the temperature begins to shift in impossible ways. He describes a house that is as cold as ice, yet as hot as fire. It's a place of sensory overload, where the very fabric of reality seems to vibrate with divine energy. And at the heart of this palace, Enoch sees it, a high throne, shining like hoarfrost, surrounded by a circuit of flaming suns and the voices of cherubim. But it is what sits upon that throne that truly overwhelms him. Enoch describes a great glory so bright that no angel could even look upon his face. This is the source of all order, the architect of the stars he had just studied. And yet this terrifying infinite being calls out to Enoch by name. He tells him not to be afraid. But he isn't calling Enoch there for a reward. He is calling him to act as a cosmic messenger. But here is the truly shocking twist, the most dramatic reversal of power in ancient literature. Enoch is sent back down, not to preach to humanity, but to deliver a final sentence to the watchers. Imagine the scene. These were beings of immense power, the sons of heaven who had mastered the laws of the universe and taught humanity the secrets of civilization. Yet when Enoch finds them, they aren't standing tall. They are huddled together in a place called Dan, southwest of Mount Hermon. They are trembling, weeping, and so consumed by shame that they cannot even lift their eyes to heaven. They know what they have done. They have seen the corruption of their offspring and the agony of the earth. And in their desperation, they do something unthinkable. They beg Enoch, a mortal man, a creature they once viewed as a primitive student, to write a petition for them. They ask the human to beg God for their forgiveness. This is a total inversion of the cosmic hierarchy. The masters have become the beggars. The scribe has become the judge. Enoch sits down and records their pleas, their tears, and their regrets. He then falls into a deep sleep, and in a vision, he is taken back to the throne to receive the answer. But the answer is cold and final. God tells Enoch, "You should have been the ones to intercede for men, not men for you." The watchers had abandoned their high station for the low pleasures of the earth, and in doing so, they had forfeited their right to mercy. Their sentence is eternal. They are to be bound in the dark abysses of the earth for 70 generations until the day of the final judgment. This theme of a divine rebel being eternally punished for helping humanity is a hauntingly familiar one. It connects Enoch to a universal thread found in myths across the globe. Think back to Prometheus, the titan of Greek mythology. Like the Watchers, Prometheus was a divine being who looked upon humanity and saw our limitations. He stole the fire of the gods, a clear symbol for forbidden technology and knowledge, and gave it to us so that we might survive. But the gods did not see this as a gift. They saw it as a theft of the divine prerogative. Prometheus's punishment was legendary in its cruelty. He was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where every day an eagle would arrive to tear out his liver. Because he was immortal, his liver would regrow every night, only for the agony to begin again at dawn. Why do we see the same pattern in every corner of the world? From the north to the Levant to the Mediterranean, there is a deep underlying fear that the triumphs of our civilization, our weapons, our jewelry, our science, were purchased at a terrible price. There is a sense that the triumph we possess is stolen, and that the beings who gave it to us are still paying for that crime in some dark, forgotten corner of the cosmos. The Watchers in Enoch, like Prometheus, are the symbols of a stolen evolution. Their punishment is the cost of breaking the cosmic order. They are the giants who fell so that we might rise, but they left us with a legacy that is as dangerous as it is powerful. As Enoch delivers this final devastating news to the fallen angels, he realizes that the story doesn't end with a flood. The corruption they introduced into the human heart was like a virus, one that would survive the water and continue to mutate. And it's here that the Book of Enoch takes its most surreal turn, using a code of animals to describe the entire future of the world. Let's continue our journey into the animal apocalypse. After witnessing the terrifying judgment of the angels, the Book of Enoch takes a turn that feels strangely modern. It is a section known to scholars as the animal apocalypse. If you've ever read George Orwell's Animal Farm, you will find this part of the text strikingly familiar. It is a retelling of the entire history of the world, from the Garden of Eden to the final judgment, but with a bizarre twist. Every major figure and nation is represented by a different animal. Why would an ancient prophet choose to describe the rise and fall of empires as a literal zoo? To understand this, we have to look at the opening of the vision. It begins with a white bull emerging from the earth. This bull represents Adam, the first human, in a state of primal purity. His descendants are also bulls, some white, some black, some red. But then, the dream turns dark. Enoch describes seeing the stars fall from heaven. If you've been following the story of the Watchers, you know exactly what this means. These stars descend into the fields and begin to interbreed with the cows. The result is a nightmare. The cows give birth to elephants, camels, and donkeys, monstrous, oversized creatures that begin to terrorize the herd. This is the animal apocalypse's way of describing the Nephilim. It is a world where the natural order has been replaced by a chaotic hybridity, where the peaceful bulls of humanity are being trampled by the beasts of the rebellion. But as the vision progresses, the symbolism shifts. The descendants of Abraham are no longer depicted as powerful bulls, but as vulnerable sheep. For the rest of the vision, history is told through the eyes of this flock. The sheep are constantly under attack. They are hunted by lions, which represent the Babylonians, by wolves representing the Egyptians, and by eagles and ravens representing the Greeks and Romans. It is here where things get truly interesting. We have to ask ourselves, why use such a complex code? Why not just name the kings and the battles? The answer lies in the dangerous political climate of the 2nd century BC. During the time the Book of Enoch was being compiled, Judea was under the iron fist of the Hellenistic kings, specifically a man named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus wasn't just another conqueror, he was a persecutor. He attempted to wipe out Jewish identity, banning the Sabbath and desecrating the temple in Jerusalem by installing a statue of Zeus. If you were a Jewish writer living under his rule, speaking out against the king was a death sentence. But if you wrote a story about ravens plucking out the eyes of sheep, the message was clear to those who had the eyes to see it, while remaining a nonsensical fable to the Greek censors. The animal apocalypse was a form of coded resistance. It was a way to tell the faithful that their suffering was part of a much larger cosmic struggle. It provided a sense of order in a world that felt like it was falling apart. It told the sheep that even though the eagles were circling, the shepherd had not forgotten them. In the vision, the sheep eventually grow weary of the slaughter. They begin to cry out, but for a long time, God remains silent. He appoints 70 shepherds to guard the flock, but these shepherds prove to be corrupt, allowing the predators to devour even more of the sheep than was permitted. This is a biting critique of the religious and political leaders of Enoch's time, men who had sold out their own people to please their foreign masters. But just when all seems lost, the vision reaches its climax. A large horn grows on one of the lambs, a symbol of a new, militant leader who rallies the flock. Then the heavens open. The Lord of the sheep descends with a great sword, and the earth swallows the predators. But the most beautiful part of the vision is the ending. After the enemies are destroyed, the sheep are transformed. They all become large white bulls once again. The Messiah figure appears as a great white bull with massive horns, and all the animals of the field return to this original, pure state. The world is reset. The corruption of the stars and the beasts is wiped away, and humanity is restored to the dignity it had in the beginning. It is a powerful vision of hope, written by people who were living through an actual apocalypse of their own. It suggests that history isn't just a random series of tragedies, but a journey back to a lost perfection. It uses the language of nature to tell a story about the survival of the soul. However, the writers of Enoch weren't just concerned with the politics of their own time. They believed the forbidden knowledge brought by the Watchers had a long-term shelf life. They suspected that even after the predators were gone, the tools of the rebellion would remain, waiting to be rediscovered by future generations. This leads us to a chilling realization. If we look at the technologies the Watchers taught us, the weapons, the vanity, the manipulation of the natural world, we realize that we aren't just reading about ancient history, we are looking in a mirror. Let's continue our journey into the present day and see how the ghosts of the Watchers are haunting our own world of silicon and steel. It's easy to look back at the Book of Enoch as a collection of dusty myths, a relic of a primitive imagination obsessed with giants and falling stars. But if we look closer at the specific secrets the Watchers leaked to humanity, the story starts to feel uncomfortably modern. We might not be forging bronze swords at the foot of Mount Hermon anymore, but we are currently building a world out of silicon and code that mirrors the forbidden curriculum of the fallen angels. Think back to Azazel. He taught us the art of the blade and the art of the mask. In the ancient world, this meant metallurgy and cosmetics. Today, we have simply scaled those concepts to a global, digital level. We've traded the bronze sword for the nuclear warhead and the autonomous drone. We've traded the antimony eye paint for the deepfake and the social media algorithm. The essence remains the same: the use of external tools to project power, to deceive, and to dominate the natural order. But there's more to it than just the tools we use. We have to look at the mutation of our own biology. The Nephilim were described as a biological corruption, a forbidden hybrid of the divine and the mortal. Today, for the first time in human history, we are standing on the brink of our own genetic revolution. With technologies like CRISPR and gene editing, we are learning to rewrite the very code of life. We are, quite literally, attempting to engineer our own mighty men of renown, beings that are faster, stronger, and more intelligent than the natural human. But as we saw with the Nephilim, a creature that is designed for power rather than balance eventually becomes a parasite upon the earth. This leads us to a profound realization about our own psychological state. It's a concept we might call the moral gap. Why did the writers of Enoch view the gift of civilization as a curse? It wasn't because they were anti-progress. It was because they understood a fundamental truth about the human condition. Truth, or knowledge, is a death sentence if it is delivered before the recipient has the moral maturity to handle it. Imagine giving the keys to a high-performance sports car to a toddler. The car is a masterpiece of engineering, but in the hands of someone without the judgment to control it, it is a weapon of mass destruction. This is the tragedy of the Watchers. They didn't just give us fire. They gave us fire while we were still children playing in a forest. We see the same gap widening in our own era, specifically with the rise of artificial intelligence. We have created a Watcher of our own, a silicon mind that can predict our desires, manipulate our perceptions, and outpace our cognitive abilities. We have the technology to end hunger and disease, yet we use those same tools to refine the art of warfare and the efficiency of surveillance. We have the power of gods, but we are still governed by the primal, fearful hearts of the creatures that once cowered in the caves of Qumran. This is the diabolical coincidence of our time. We are living through a pre-flood moment. We are surrounded by a massive lore drop of technological power, yet we lack the spiritual and ethical framework to ensure it doesn't devour us. The Watchers taught us how to mine the earth and chart the stars, but they never taught us how to live in peace with one another. Are we repeating the pre-flood mistake? Are we building a civilization that is so top-heavy with forbidden knowledge that it is destined to collapse under its own weight? In the Book of Enoch, the only solution to the corruption of the Watchers was a total reset, the Great Flood. It was a cosmic delete button designed to wipe away the biological and technological errors that had compromised the human image. Today, as we watch our climate shift and our societies fracture under the weight of our own inventions, we have to ask, is the flood already rising? But before we resign ourselves to a watery grave, we have to remember the hero of our story. Enoch was the man who survived the transition. He was the one who managed to master the laws of the stars without losing his soul. He represents the possibility that humanity can bridge the gap between truth and wisdom. But if this book was so vital for our survival, why was it really taken away from us? Why did the leaders of the early church decide that Enoch's message was too dangerous for the masses to hear? Let's continue our journey into the final mystery, the political execution of a prophet. We often use the word banned because it carries a certain weight. It suggests a dark conspiratorial secret, an image of men in hooded robes suppressing the truth to protect their power. But the story of why the book of Enoch was left out of the Bible is actually much more human and, in a way, more revealing about our own history. Imagine you are a leader of the early church in the 3rd or 4th century. You are trying to build a stable, unified faith across a vast and chaotic Roman Empire. Your goal is to define exactly what it means to be a follower of Christ. In this context, the book of Enoch was a massive problem. It wasn't banned by a single villainous decree. It was gradually sidelined because its contents were simply too wild for a young institution seeking order. Think about what we've explored. A text that describes angels desiring human women, a mortal man acting as a judge over the heavenly host, and a universe governed by complex, almost scientific, celestial laws. To the scholars of the time, this looked dangerously close to the pagan mythologies of Greece or Babylon, the very things they were trying to move away from. It was too apocalyptic, too focused on the fringes of the supernatural. For a church trying to establish a clear moral and social structure, Enoch was an unruly guest that didn't know when to leave the party. Yet while the West was closing its doors, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept its windows wide open. In the isolation of the African highlands, Enoch wasn't a liability. He was a hero. They saw in this book what the Roman censors chose to ignore, a profound story of justice for the powerless. This brings us to the real heart of why Enoch still matters today. Beyond the giants, the falling stars, and the forbidden technology, this is a book written by and for people who were suffering. When you read the Animal Apocalypse or the Letters of Enoch, you are reading the words of people living under the boot of empires. Whether it was the Greeks under Antiochus or the Romans later on, these writers felt the crushing weight of injustice. They saw the mighty of the earth prospering through greed and violence, while the sheep, the common people, were being devoured. The book of Enoch provided an answer to a question we still ask. If there is a God, why is the world so broken? Its answer was radical. It claimed that the evil we see isn't just human failing. It's a cosmic imbalance, a glitch introduced by higher powers who abandoned their duty, and more importantly, it promised a great reversal. It told the oppressed that a day would come when the kings and the powerful would be brought low, and the humble would be raised up. It is a story of ultimate accountability. In the Enochian vision, no one, not even an angel, is above the law. Enoch himself is the perfect symbol for this message. He isn't a warrior. He isn't a king. He is a scribe. He is a man whose only weapon is a pen and the courage to record what he sees. He represents the scribe of truth, the one who stands in the presence of power and refuses to look away from the corruption. In a world that often feels like it's governed by forces beyond our control, whether they are ancient empires or modern algorithms, the figure of Enoch remains a powerful memento. He reminds us that even when the truth is banned or lost, it has a way of surviving. It survives in the caves of the desert, in the mountains of Ethiopia, and in the persistent curiosity of the human mind. The book of Enoch was excluded from the canon, but it was never truly silenced. It remains as a ghost in our cultural DNA, a reminder that we are part of a much larger, much stranger story than we often dare to imagine. It tells us that while the mighty may write the official history, the last scribe is the one who remembers the truth. So perhaps it's time to stop looking at Enoch as a banned book and start seeing it as a bridge to a part of ourselves that still believes in justice, still wonders at the stars, and still hopes for a world where the sheep are finally safe from the wolves. But Enoch is only the beginning of this hidden library. If you think the history of the Watchers is shocking, wait until you see what was found in the sands of Egypt, a collection of texts that claim to reveal the forbidden teachings of Jesus himself. But that is a story for another time. The story of Enoch is just one chapter in an extended universe of banned literature. It invites us to be more than just passive readers. It asks us to be seekers of the truth. If you enjoyed this dive into the Apocrypha, then you won't want to miss our next exploration. We'll be heading to the sands of Egypt to uncover the Gnostic Gospels, texts that claim to hold the forbidden teachings of Jesus himself. If you'd like to see more long-form content like this, please consider subscribing. A like and a comment also go a long way. Until then, it leaves us with one final thought. Is true faith found in the certainty of the canon or in the restless curiosity that drives us to look behind the curtain? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.